On the planet Zarn, the land was full of green jungles, high mountains, and strange animals. The people who lived there were called the Yulari. They were tall, strong, and proud. They followed old traditions and respected their tribe's leaders. Every Yulari had a place in the tribe. Every Yulari followed the rules except Rena. Rena was different. She was the tallest Yulari anyone had seen, almost 10 feet tall. Her skin was a deep silver, and her eyes glowed like stars in the night sky. Her strength was beyond anything the tribe had known. She could lift trees, outrun wild beasts, and fight 10 warriors at once. But it wasn't just her strength that made her different. It was her spirit. She didn't listen. She didn't obey. She didn't care for the rules the tribe tried to teach her. The elders warned her. The warriors challenged her. But Rena always did what she wanted. She climbed forbidden cliffs, swam across deadly rivers, and hunted alone in the high forest. To the tribe, she was wild and dangerous. One day, after a fierce argument with the elders, Rena made her choice. She left the village and walked into the mountains, where no one dared to live. The tribe called her a mistake, a storm, a shadow they would forget. Years passed. The Yulari spoke of her only in whispers. The Wild One, they called her. But Rena did not die. She lived alone in the mountain forest. She built a home in a tall stone cave. She hunted great beasts with her bare hands. She roared louder than thunder. In her heart, she believed she needed no one. Then one morning, something strange happened. A ball of fire flew across the sky. It screamed through the air and crashed. Deep into the forest, birds flew in panic. The ground shook. Trees burned. Rena stood on a cliff and watched the smoke rise. She narrowed her glowing eyes. That fire was not natural. Something had come from the stars. Curious, Rena made her way through the forest. She moved quickly, her strong legs leaping over rocks and roots. After hours of walking, she found the crash site. A broken ship, made of silver metal, lay in the middle of a clearing. Strange marks covered its side. Fire hissed from its broken engine. Near the wreckage, a small creature crawled out. It was weak, thin, and hurt. Its skin was soft, and it wore strange clothes. It was not Yulari. It was not from Zarn. It was a human. His name was Dan. He was a young explorer from Earth. His mission was to study alien planets. But something went wrong. His ship lost power, and he crashed far from help. He had a hurt arm, a broken scanner, and no idea where he was. Rena watched him from behind the trees. She could crush him with one hand, but she didn't move. Something about him was different. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He stood up slowly, checked his wounds, and started gathering wood. He made a fire. He set traps. He drank water from the leaves. He used tools Rena had never seen before. That night, as Dan tried to sleep near the fire, a giant beast crept through the trees. Its eyes glowed red. Its fangs were long and sharp. It moved closer, ready to strike. Suddenly, a loud roar shook the forest. Rena jumped from the shadows. She hit the beast with her fist, sending it flying. The fight was short. Rena was too strong. Too fast. She crushed the beast and stood tall over it. Dan stared in shock. He had never seen a creature so tall, so powerful. He thought she would kill him next. But Rena just looked at him and turned away. "Wait," Dan said, raising his good hand. "Thank you." Rena stopped. No one had thanked her in years. She looked back at the small human. He did not beg. He did not run. He simply looked at her. Calm and curious, Rena gave a small nod and walked away into the dark. Dan sat by the fire, still breathing fast. He didn't know what she was, but he knew she had saved his life. The next day, Rena watched from a distance again. Dan worked all day, building a better shelter, fixing a broken tool, and cooking strange food. He limped a little but didn't complain. He talked to himself while working, maybe to keep his mind busy. By evening, Rena stepped into the clearing. Dan saw her and stood up. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But she dropped a large fruit near him and stepped back. "For me?" Dan asked. Rena only nodded once. That night they sat by the fire, quiet, still, two strangers from different worlds. Rena didn't know why she helped him. But something deep inside her felt different when he looked at her with respect. Not fear. And Dan didn't know if she was a danger or a friend. But he knew one thing: he wasn't alone anymore. The fire crackled softly in the night as Dan sat near it, eating pieces of roasted fruit Rena had given him. It tasted sweet and juicy, much better than the dry rations from his escape pod. Across the fire, the tall, silver-skinned alien woman sat still, her eyes glowing in the dark. Her name, he had learned from her pointing to herself and saying it, was Rena. They didn't speak the same language, but they had started to understand each other with simple signs, pointing, and actions. Rena watched carefully as Dan used tools, fixed his arm brace, and cooked food. She was curious about everything, especially the strange items from his bag. But she didn't touch anything without his permission. That surprised Dan. He had expected a wild, dangerous creature. But now he wasn't so sure. Each day, their silent friendship grew stronger. In the mornings, Dan collected water and cleaned the camp. Rena would go into the forest and return with fruits, fish, or sometimes meat. Dan began to fix small things from the broken ship and taught Rena how some human tools worked, like a small flashlight and a solar-powered heater. Rena found the flashlight amazing. She laughed the first time the light shined on her hand. It was the first time Dan had seen her smile. She was strong and silent, but not cruel. Once, when a tree almost fell on Dan, Rena moved faster than his eyes could follow and pulled him away. Her hands, though giant and rough, held him gently. She didn't say anything, just looked down to check if he was hurt. "I'm okay," Dan said, breathing fast. "Thanks to you." Rena stared for a moment, then walked away without a word. That was her way. At night, Dan would draw in the dirt with a stick, trying to teach her human words. He pointed at himself. "Dan," she pointed. "Den." It was close enough. He pointed at her. "Rena," she gave a small nod. "Rena." Soon, they could say basic things: food, danger, fire, safe, water. It was slow, but Dan didn't mind. He found himself looking forward to every moment with her, but Rena was thinking more deeply. She had never spoken this much with anyone, not even in her tribe. No one had ever asked her what she liked or showed her new things with patience. Dan didn't look at her with fear or hate. He looked at her with respect. Even when she got angry once and crushed a log in her hand, Dan didn't run. He simply said, "It's okay," and gave her space. That confused Rena, and slowly, it changed her. One afternoon, while Dan was fixing his damaged scanner, Rena stood behind him, watching closely. He was talking out loud again, trying to fix a wire. Rena pointed. "Firebox?" Dan laughed. No, scanner. It shows maps, places." She tilted her head. "Map?" Dan nodded and drew on the ground. He showed mountains, rivers, and their camp. Rena's eyes widened. She took the stick and added a path, one that led through the mountains. She pointed. "My cave." Dan was amazed. "You live there?" She nodded. That night, Rena took Dan to see it. It was high in the cliffs, a long walk, but she helped him climb. Inside, the cave was huge and beautiful. There were glowing stones, soft moss on the floor, and old carvings on the walls. Dan looked around in wonder. "This is incredible." Rena smiled for a moment, proud. Then she showed him a part of the wall with old symbol stories of her tribe. She pointed to one showing a group of Yulari standing together, then another of a single figure walking away. She tapped her chest. Rena, Dan understood. She had left the tribe, or maybe they had left her. He placed a hand on her arm. "You're not alone now." Rena looked at him, eyes serious, but said nothing. Back at the camp, days passed peacefully. Then one evening, strange sounds came from the forest. Rena stood up fast, listening. She moved into the trees, and Dan followed quietly. They found tracks, big ones. Yulari tracks. Someone else from her tribe had entered the forest. Rena tensed. Her face became cold again. She told Dan to stay back using a hand sign, then disappeared into the woods like a shadow. Dan waited, nervous, near the fire. Hours passed. Finally she returned, her arm scratched, her expression hard. Dan asked, "What happened?" Rena drew in the dirt a symbol of her tribe, then crossed it out. Dan understood. "They're angry you're helping me?" Rena nodded once. Dan sighed. "So what now?" Rena looked at the fire, then at him. Slowly she spoke. "Fight come soon." Dan stood up. "Then we fight together." Rena's eyes widened. No one had ever said that to her before. She didn't smile this time. She only nodded, but inside, something changed again. For the first time, she wasn't just protecting Dan, she was standing beside him. The jungle of Zarn had many dangers, giant beasts, quicksand, poisonous plants. But now, something else was coming. Rena had seen the signs. Her tribe was nearby. They had followed her path. And she knew why. They were not here to talk. They were here to take her back or destroy what they believed was wrong. Rena sat silently beside the fire. Dan was fixing a piece of broken tech, but he kept glancing at her. He could feel her worry. Her body was still, but her fingers tapped the ground slowly. She never did that before. "Will they attack?" Dan asked quietly. Rena looked at him. "Maybe, not yet," Dan frowned. "Because of me?" Rena shook her head. "Because I changed." Dan stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "You didn't change. You just became free." Rena didn't fully understand the word free, but she liked the sound of it. Over the next few days, they prepared. Dan made new traps with ropes, spikes, and sharp stones. Rena gathered more food and scouted the area. Together, they moved deeper into the mountain forest, closer to Rena's hidden cave. It was safer there, higher ground, and harder to reach. During the climb, Dan slipped on a wet rock. He shouted as he fell, but before he hit the ground, Rena caught him with one arm. She held him gently, like a feather, and helped him stand. "You are heavy," she said, almost smiling. Dan laughed. "You're just very strong." Rena helped him walk the rest of the way. Her steps were slow so he could keep up. At the top, they reached the cave. Dan looked around, amazed again at its glowing walls and peaceful silence. "This is your home?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, alone." Dan looked around. "Not anymore." That night they sat by a fire inside the cave. Dan shared a story about Earth, how people lived in cities, used machines, and worked together. Rena listened carefully. She didn't understand all the words, but she liked the way he spoke. His voice was calm. His eyes were kind. She shared a story too, using words and hand signs. She told Dan about her childhood, how she was born stronger than the other Yulari children. The elders feared her. The warriors challenged her. But she always won. She never wanted to hurt anyone, but she was different. And different was not welcome. Dan understood more than her words. He could feel her pain. "Maybe you weren't made to follow," he said. "Maybe you were made to lead." Rena didn't reply, but she remembered those words. In the morning, they heard a roar in the forest. Not an animal, a war call. Rena's face became serious. She looked at Dan. "They are close." Dan grabbed his bag. "Then let's be ready." Rena handed him a spear she had carved for him. It was tall and sharp, with a strong grip. Dan took it, surprised by the gift. "You made this for me?" She nodded. "You are small, but not weak." Dan smiled. "Thanks, giant lady." They moved Out to scout. From the high rocks they saw them 3 Yulari warriors, strong and tall like Rena, but wearing armor made of bone and metal. One of them carried a spear that glowed blue. Rena narrowed her eyes. "Karn," she said. Then looked at her. "You know him? Warrior, strong, proud." Dan watched Karn shouting orders to the others. "He came for you." Rena said nothing. They returned to the cave and made their plan. Rena would not attack unless they did first. Dan placed traps along the narrow paths leading up to the cave. He also set up warning alarms using old tech metal cans and string. That would make noise if someone stepped through. That night, Dan couldn't sleep. He sat near the fire thinking. Rena sat beside him. "You afraid?" she asked. He nodded. "A little." "Good," Rena said. "Means you will fight carefully." Dan laughed a little. "I never thought I'd be here, fighting beside a giant alien woman in the mountains of another planet." Rena looked at him. "And now?" Dan looked into her glowing eyes. "Now I wouldn't leave even if I could." Rena blinked slowly. That meant something to her. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the rocks, clanging metal. A trap had been triggered. Rena stood up quickly, spear in hand. "They come," she said. Dan stood too. "Then let's show them what wild really means." The sound of metal cans clashing in the dark echoed like a loud alarm through the mountains. Dan and Rena stood near the fire, spears ready. Wind blew through the cave entrance, but they didn't move. "Trap caught someone," Dan whispered. Rena nodded. Her face was calm, but her muscles were tight. She moved forward slowly, stepping outside the cave. Dan followed her quietly. They reached a rocky ledge above the narrow path leading up to the cave. Below, a large Yulari warrior struggled, stuck in vines and a net. His armor was dented, and he growled in anger. "Gen," Rena said softly. "Young, not smart." Suddenly, another voice came from the trees. "Let him go, Rena." It was deep and cold. A tall Yulari stepped into the moonlight. He wore dark armor and held a glowing blue spear. His long black hair was tied behind his head. His yellow eyes stared up toward the cave. It was Karn. Rena stepped forward, her voice strong. "This is not your place." Karn lifted his head. "You broke the laws. You protect the outsider. You shame our kind." Dan raised his spear, ready. Karn noticed him and laughed. "This little thing? This is why you turned against your own people." Rena's eyes narrowed. "He is brave, smarter than you." Gen cut himself free and stood beside Karn. Another Yulari warrior stepped from the shadows, making them 3. Dan knew they were outnumbered. Karn spoke louder. "The council gave me permission. Bring you back or break you. One chance. Come with us, leave the human." Rena looked down at Dan, then back at Karn. "No." Karn's eyes turned sharp. "Then, prepare." He threw his spear toward them, but Rena jumped in front. The spear hit the stone beside her and fell. Dan's eyes widened. That could have hit her heart. Rena growled. "You throw from below. Cowards move." She jumped down the ledge. Dan gasped. "Rena, wait." She landed in front of Karn, and the fight began. Gen and the other warrior tried to rush her, but Rena moved like a storm. Her fist hit the first one's chest, sending him flying into a tree. She kicked the second one into the rocks. They groaned and didn't get up. Karn was quick. He pulled out another blade and struck at her side. Rena blocked with her arm, but the blade cut her skin slightly. Blood dripped, but she didn't stop. She spun around and hit Karn hard in the chest. He flew back, landing on his knees. "You fight strong," Karn growled, standing. "But you fight alone." Then, a rock hit his shoulder. Dan had climbed down, holding a second spear and throwing stones. "You're wrong," Dan said. "She's not alone." Karn growled and ran toward Dan, ready to strike. Before he could reach him, Rena grabbed Karn by the arm and threw him to the ground. Her hand held his throat. I spared you once, Rena said coldly. Next time I won't. Karn coughed and looked up at her. You'll regret this. The elders will send more. They'll bring all the warriors. You'll lose everything. Rena leaned closer. I already lost them. And I found something better. She let him go. Karn gasped, stood up slowly, and backed away. This isn't over, he said. Then he and the others disappeared into the trees. Dan let out a long breath. That was close, Rena nodded. Her shoulder was bleeding, but she didn't complain. Dan rushed to her. You're hurt. Rena looked at the wound. Small cut. Dan opened his bag and pulled out his med kit. Sit, I'll clean it. She sat on a rock while Dan gently cleaned and covered the wound. You didn't have to fight all of them alone, Dan said. Rena looked at him. You came. Of course I did. You saved me many times. This time it was my turn. They went back to the cave. The fire was low but warm. Rena leaned against the stone wall. Dan handed her water and sat beside her. They'll send more, won't they? Dan asked. Rena nodded. Yes, next time, more warriors, stronger, maybe elders hunter. Dan thought for a moment. Then we need a plan. We can't keep hiding forever. Rena looked at him. What plan? Dan smiled slightly. You said your people follow the strongest, right? She nodded. Then maybe it's time they see who you really are. Not wild, not broken, but better, smarter, braver, stronger than any of them. Rena's eyes focused. You mean challenge? Dan nodded. Challenge their champion. Prove you deserve to be heard. Maybe then they'll listen. Rena was quiet. She looked at the stars from the cave mouth. They never listened before, she whispered. Dan looked at her with calm eyes. Maybe because you never had someone stand beside you before. Rena closed her eyes for a moment. Then she spoke. Then we go. Dan nodded. Together. The sky was gray the next morning. Clouds moved fast across the mountains, and the wind carried the scent of danger. Rena stood at the edge of her cave, her silver hair blowing in the wind. She watched the trees below, silent and still. Inside the cave, Dan packed his bag. He checked his solar charger, tools, and the sharp stone spear Rena had made for him. He knew the next move would be dangerous. But they had no choice. He stepped out and stood beside her. They'll come again, Dan said. Rena nodded. Yes. Many. Dan looked down the path. We can't take them all. We don't, Rena said. We survive, then we move. Dan understood. This was not just about winning. It was about showing the truth. Rena was not a threat. She was a leader. A warrior with heart. By evening, they were ready. Dan placed more traps along the cliffs. Simple things, trip ropes, falling logs, sharp spikes hidden under leaves. Rena helped, showing him better places to hide them. Just before sunset, they heard the war horns, deep and loud. The sound rolled through the jungle like thunder. Dan's heart pounded. He looked at Rena. She was calm. Here they come, he said. Rena took her spear. Let them. From the trees below, a group of 6 Yulari warriors appeared, all strong, tall, and wearing dark bone armor. Their leader was not Karn this time, but a massive Yulari with golden markings across his arms. His name was Drek, unknown. Hunter of the tribe. He was older than Rena but still powerful. Rena, he shouted. You broke the laws. You protect the human. Step down and return, or fall. Rena stood at the top of the stone steps. She raised her voice. I protect truth. I protect peace. You bring only fear, Drek growled. You choose a small outsider over your own kind? Dan stepped beside her. I'm not her enemy. Why are you? Drek lifted his warblade. We do not speak to animals. Dan whispered. He really needs manners. Rena held out her arm to stop Dan. Stay near. I fight first. The Yulari charged. First warrior ran up the narrow path, but stepped into a hidden trap. A rope wrapped around his leg and yanked him into the air, swinging him upside down. The second one jumped over, only to hit a hidden spike. He roared in pain and fell. Drek shouted, "Careful! Use the side!" 3 more tried climbing the rocks. From the side, but Rena was already there. She met them with full force. Her spear struck like lightning. She knocked one into a wall, broke another's weapon, and flipped the third over the cliff. Her movements were fast and powerful, too fast for most to see clearly. Dan threw rocks from above, hitting heads and breaking focus. He even used a blinding flash from one of his devices to confuse them. But then, Drek climbed up himself. He was stronger, faster, and smarter than the others. He blocked Rena's strike and kicked her back. They fought hard, blade against spear, strength against speed. Dan watched with wide eyes. The battle shook the stone ground. Sparks flew as weapons clashed. Rena was hit in the arm. Drek had cut her with his blade. She growled and struck back harder. Then Dan saw another warrior sneaking behind her, blade raised. Without thinking, Dan ran and tackled the Yulari from the side. The warrior fell, surprised, and hit his head on the rocks. Rena saw it. Dan had saved her. She roared, turned, and hit Drek with full strength in the chest. He flew back and hit the wall, his blade falling. Rena stood over him, her spear pointed at his neck. "Enough," she said. Drek coughed. "You fight like a beast." Rena stepped back. "No, I fight with purpose." She turned to the rest of the warriors. Some were hurt. Others stood still, unsure what to do. "I don't want to destroy," she said. "I want change. Let your leaders face me in the old way. If I win, I speak. If I lose, I leave." One warrior stepped forward. "You challenge the council?" Rena nodded. "Yes, at the Ring of Fire, before the whole tribe." Drek stood up slowly. "Very well. We will take your message, but they will not go easy." Rena stared at him. "I don't want easy." The warriors left, carrying their wounded with them. Dan sat down, breathing hard. "That was insane." Rena looked at him. "You fought." Dan smiled. "You too." She raised an eyebrow. "You are small, but brave." Dan laughed. "Thanks, I think." That night, Dan cleaned her wound again. As she rested, he sat near her and looked at the stars. "You don't need to do this alone," he said. "I'm not," Rena replied. And for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. The air was hot and dry as the twin suns of planet Zarn rose above the horizon. The jungle was far behind now. In front of them stood the ancient Ring of Fire, a wide circle of black stone surrounded by red-hot lava pits. It was the place where the Yulari held their oldest and most sacred trials. Here, warriors challenged each other for honor, leadership, or justice. Only the strongest entered the ring and left alive. Rena stood tall at the edge of the ring. Her silver skin glowed in the sun, her body marked by old scars and fresh ones from the last battle. Beside her stood Dan, dressed in simple gear and holding his spear. They had traveled for 2 days to reach this place. Now they would face the final test. Around them, Yulari tribespeople gathered. Hundreds had come, elders, hunters, and even younglings. They all whispered as they saw Rena standing proudly with a human by her side. "Is that the Wild One?" She was exiled. She returned. With an outsider, some laughed. Others looked worried. But no one stopped her. At the far end of the ring, the council of elders sat in tall stone seats. The oldest among them, a woman with golden tattoos, raised her staff. "Rena," she said loudly, "you have returned without permission. You bring a human into our sacred grounds. Explain yourself." Rena stepped forward. Her voice was clear. "I come not for war. I come for truth. You called me wild. You feared me, but I never betrayed the tribe. I only wanted freedom." The crowd murmured. "You say this now, the elder replied. But you refused order. You refused respect. I refused to be silent, Rena said. Now I speak. Let me prove myself. I call for a challenge. The elder raised an eyebrow. You know the law. A challenge must be accepted. I know, Rena said. I challenge your champion. If I win, I speak before the tribe. If I lose, I leave and never return. The elder stood and turned to the crowd. Let the warrior speak his name. From the shadows, a tall figure stepped into the ring. His body was covered in black and gold armor. His shoulders were wide. His hands were heavy like stone. It was Therak, the tribe's greatest fighter. Even Rena had heard stories of him. He had never lost a challenge. Therak looked at her with no emotion. I accept. The elder raised her staff. Then let the trial begin. The crowd grew silent. Rena and Therak stepped into the center of the ring. The heat from the lava made the air shimmer. Dan stood at the edge, watching closely. He knew Rena was strong, but this fight was different. This was not about survival, it was about respect. Tharok moved first. He swung a heavy axe toward Rena's side. She dodged quickly and struck back with her spear. The axe blocked her strike with a loud clang. Sparks flew. The crowd gasped. Tharok attacked again, this time faster. He pushed her back with heavy blows. Rena was strong, but Therak had size and skill. She jumped aside, rolled, and struck again. This time she hit his leg, and he grunted. Dan watched every move. He noticed something. Therak was powerful but used the same moves again and again. Rena had more variety, more speed. She just needed to outlast him. Watch his right, Dan shouted. Rena heard him. When Therak swung right, she ducked and struck his ribs. He stumbled slightly. The crowd began to cheer. Some shouted her name. Rena moved quickly, now one strike after another. She used everything she had learned with Dan. Timing, patience, clever footwork. She didn't fight like the others. She fought with both power and intelligence. Therak grew. Angry, he swung harder, but anger made him slow. Rena waited. Then jumped, flipped over his back, and kicked him into the stone ground. The ring went silent. Therak didn't rise. The elder stood. Shocked, Rena stepped back, breathing hard. She lowered her spear. I do not kill, she said. This is not for blood. This is for truth. Dan smiled proudly. The crowd stared in silence. Then one voice shouted, Rena. Another followed, Rena. Rena, soon the whole circle was calling her name. Even some warriors who once hated her now cheered. The elder raised her staff. Rena has won the challenge. Dan stepped into the ring. Rena looked at him and gave a small smile. You did it, he said. No, she replied softly. We did. The elder called the crowd to silence. You have earned your right to speak, Rena. Say your truth. Rena looked around at the faces, the young, the old, the strong, the weak. She raised her voice. For many years I was called wild. But strength without guidance is lost. I did not leave the tribe. The tribe left me behind. But I found a better way. A new way. With this human, I learned more than battle. I learned peace. Trust, balance. She turned to Dan. He taught me. That small does not mean weak. Different does not mean wrong. We are stronger when we learn from others, not when we fear them. The crowd listened. Some Yulari nodded. Some looked ashamed. The elder spoke again. You speak truth, and you earned respect. Let the council decide. She turned to the others. After some whispers and silent nods, the elder turned back. Rena, the exile is ended. You may stay, and your human may stay too. Dan looked surprised. Me? Rena laughed. Yes, you. Welcome to the tribe. The trial was over. The chant still echoed in the stone valley. Rena, Rena. but now they were not shouts of fear or mockery. They were calls of respect. Warriors, elders, and even children had seen her win not just with strength, but with heart. She had proven herself, not as a monster, not as a mistake, but as a leader. That evening, as the suns dipped behind the mountains, a celebration began in the center of the Yulari gathering place. Fires burned bright, drums echoed. Yulari danced in circles, sang old songs, and shared food. For the first time in many years, Rena stood among them, not outside looking in. She wore no crown, no medals, but when she walked through the crowd, warriors stepped aside, elders nodded. Young ones looked at her with wide, respectful eyes. Walked beside her. His small size didn't matter anymore. In the eyes of the Yulari, he was not a weak outsider. He was a brave spirit, a thinker, a helper, the one who had stood by the Wild One when no one else did. Many Yulari had questions for him. How do your firelights work? Why are your machines so small but strong? Can you teach us how to trap beasts without hurting them? Dan answered with a smile. He spoke simply, showed tools, and made a few people laugh with his stories. He was careful, respectful. And the tribe noticed. Later that night, Rena and Dan sat together near a quieter fire at the edge of the gathering. The stars above Zarn shined bright and calm. It was peaceful. Then handed Rena a cup of warm fruit drink. They really listened to you, Rena nodded. It took years and a friend. Dan looked into the flames. So what now? Will you stay? Here, lead them? Rena was quiet for a moment. Maybe, but not like before. I will not order, I will guide. Dan nodded. That sounds better. After a pause, she looked at him. And you? Will you leave? Dan thought carefully. His ship was still broken. Earth was far away. But even if he found a way home, what would he return to? Paperwork? Orders? Silence? I think I'm already where I belong, he said. Rena smiled slightly. Then we build something new. In the weeks that followed, a new path opened for the Yulari. Rena spoke to the elders about change. Not the kind that erased the past, but one that added to it. She showed them that learning from others, even those who looked or thought differently, made them stronger. Dan helped set up simple machines using parts from his broken ship. He built clean water tools, wind-powered lights, and small communication stones that worked like radios. The young Yulari loved learning about Earth technology. They followed him everywhere, asking questions and trying things with their own hands. Together, Dan and Rena created a new part of the village, a shared space with both Yulari and human-style designs. It became a learning place, a peaceful zone, and a meeting point for every kind of mind and skill that not everyone agreed at first. Some warriors still believed in the old ways, but none could forget how Rena had stood alone against them, how she had spared her enemies, and how she had taught through action, not just words. Slowly, the tribe began to change. Even Karn, the proud warrior who once tried to bring her down, came to speak with her one day. He stood stiff and serious but offered a simple nod. I was wrong, he said. You were never the danger. You were the spark. Rena didn't reply with anger. She simply said, then stand with me, not against. Karn gave a short bow and walked away. Months passed. The forest grew green again after the dry season. The children of the tribe played safely outside the ring of trees. The machines Dan made helped store food and clean water. And for the first time in many generations, the Yulari tribe opened their borders. One day, a strange signal came from the sky. A rescue ship from Earth was passing close. Dan received the message on his repaired scanner. They could pick him up if he gave the signal, he told Rena that night. They'll come if I call them. I could go back. Rena looked at him calmly. Will you? Dan thought for a long time. Then he smiled. Only if I bring someone with me. Rena raised an eyebrow. Earth is small. Are you sure it can hold someone like me? Dan laughed. Then maybe Earth needs to grow. They sat by the fire again, as they had done many times before. Two different beings from two different worlds. Not enemies, not strangers, but partners. The wild one had found her voice. The human had found his place. Together, they had built something new, not a kingdom, not a war camp, but a home. And in that place, strength and kindness stood side by side.